way as well. And this sometimes will depend on temperament. And that other way is to actually expand oneself and to see God in everything outside of ourselves. So consequently, in the example of that sunset, Swami's point was that sunset's beautiful. For some people, it's inspiring. Now, it wasn't for the sadhu, but for many people, a beauty in this world inspires people upward. And so consequently, when there's an upward movement, there's an upward flow of life force, and we see, and inspiration is the key to many things on the spiritual life. We raise our inspiration, and we see life in a different way. And so consequently, to be inspired, but yet in the right way, you see. Inspired to see beauty as, or something as a expression of the divine. Not beauty in and of itself. The world, it's just colors on a background of protons and neutrons and all of that. The beauty is from inside ourselves. We're projecting beauty on that. But to see that beauty is really God's beauty. And that in that way, sort of to enjoy that, but yet not to hold on to it. You see, to be free from it, to be detached from it, but to feel joy and use little joys in our life to express, to come to know what joy is, and to continue to expand that. And this was one of Master's ways that he described. He said the social way to God, that's on the spiritual path, the social way to God. And he said we love those of us engaged in the world. We love our neighbor, we love our family, or perhaps first we should say we love our family, love our spouse, love our children. He says, but then of course that, if we block it at that, we then come to that other phrase that Swami used again and again, us for and no more. And you see this in life. People, they are very loyal and devoted to their family, but there's a fence there, a boundary wall. Anything beyond that, it's, I don't, they're maybe competitive, and I don't have any need to extend my love beyond that. But Master would say, well, that love that's in the heart, expressed for the child, expressed for the wife and family, husband, needs to be a starting point. We love them, not just selfishly for what they give back to us, but we love them as an expression of our heart, and then we expand it to the next level. We then take that love that has been stimulated by that to take it to the next level and say, oh, I could love my neighbor, I could love others, I could love people on the street, I could love a stranger even, and in other words then, further, I could be a channel for love to other people. And the outward expression of that love is merely a stimulus for that love to be awakened in my heart to expand outward and shared with everybody. Now, as this happens, as we begin to expand our sympathies for other people, we begin to loosen that selfish bond of love for ourselves, of just a few. And by expanding sympathies, there is a correlation in life that whenever there is an expansion of sympathies, an expansion of love, any sort of, even on a low level, expansion of power or expansion of the ego, there's a sense of upliftment that comes with that. But in the highest sense, if we look at an expansion of sympathies, expansion of love, we feel joy. We feel we are loosening the bonds of ego on ourselves when we have expansion. We expand our sympathies ultimately until we see everybody. It's not the people themselves, but it's God within everybody, and we begin to see God in everybody. And as that happens, the bonds of ego that bind us to our little self, those bonds begin to dissipate. And slowly, slowly, we begin to be freed from them. And that definition of ego, which is, I hope you all remember this, we say it almost every week, it's that soul identified with the little self, soul identified with the body, soul identified with this personality, this limited form. If we're thinking that's who we are, we have now created a fence around ourselves that blocks out our ability to go beyond that and to identify with something larger. So this is an expansive, you might say an expansive way to which Master offered, to go beyond the ego and to expand it in that sense. Now, when I have to be careful, because if I say expand the ego, that could be misinterpreted, to make a big egotist out of us. And I'm not saying it in that way, so please understand. But you could say there are two ways. Now, this is not to say that the sadhu's way is wrong. And really, anybody who has taken up the spiritual path knows that there must be a balance. We have to have balance. If we're just always resisting, I watch out, the world is going to get me, that is, then it becomes limiting. And we find, and it becomes limiting because we begin to become self-absorbed. We're thinking about ourselves. Oh my God, then what might happen, this might, and pretty soon we become very small-minded in that way. But it's necessary to some degree to do that, because I was thinking of a person I knew, who was not that way at all, but was of the expansive nature, and so he would somewhat poo-poo this other way, and so he had bad habits. And he says, well, I'm enjoying, I'm expansive in my thinking. I'm not going to limit myself, and I'm freer that way. I'm somewhat caricaturizing this fellow, but that was somewhat of his approach. And so he had no self-control. He just did whatever he wanted to do and said, well, I'm being expansive. And it's like bad habits. We take them on and we say, well, I don't want to self-absorb and try to control these things. But what happens is you're not free. Because as soon as you take those bad habits or the opportunities to express those bad habits away from that person, is he still happy? No, he's not. So you can't say, well, I'm overcome it, unless you just take them away and see how you feel. You're not going to feel so good. So you have to have both elements in there, and especially early on the spiritual path, it's advisable to, because we're not used to it, you see. The life force has just been going out of its own habitual patterns. So we have to rein that in and see what happens. And we don't realize we're bound until we find ourselves trying to resist that bondage. Then we say, oh my gosh, I didn't have my cup of coffee in the morning. Now what am I going to do? Yeah, so this is why if you are a coffee drinker, stop for sometimes. See how you feel. And if you start going into the jitters, well, you probably got a problem you need to look at. So, but that's an example of something larger. That coffee might be a trivial thing, but there are larger issues at play here. So we have to rein those in. But on the other hand, it's a balance. We have to also expand as well. There's two sides to it, and they both have to come into play. And this is the art, you could say, of the spiritual path. Now, this when you apply this to ego, you can see what we're doing. I want to control that. My ego, I have a problem with it, we might think. And all of us struggle with this. We have the introverts, we have the extroverts, and either one is not good. What we want to do is we want to transcend either. And introversion is self-absorption. Extroversion is just sort of free flow of, and also making the most of our ego. Neither is the right path. We have to find that middle ground. And so in the sense of the ego, we're confronted with this, and I think everybody comes to a point where they see the dilemma. There's a real dilemma here. Now this was important to Swami. This is something in Swami's life that because he was a man who was expansive. He had great talent. He had great talent. He was, I mean, we can always talk about, oh, the man wrote this many music pieces and this many books, and he did this, and he did this, and you can see the man was a genius, and he had outward creativity. But in his first years of taking up the spiritual path, he lived in the ashram, and really that side of himself had to find an expression of serving Master's work. He put his creativity into serving the work and not in any sort of outward form. But yet, he found that creativity could be expressed in many ways that served Master's work even more. And he wondered, actually other people accused him of being an egotist. You're wanting to write a book. That's okay, but don't put your name on it. I said, okay, there was no problem. He wasn't worried about the name. He wanted to write the book. You want to sing songs? You want to go up and you want to put your name on a poster and draw people to your discourse? It's egotist. You're an egotist. And he ran into this because he was a man of tremendous energy who was just, exploding with creative ideas. But people who perhaps, I suspect, didn't have that creativity, or perhaps for whatever their reason, say, well, they could only think of it because if they had been in that position, it would have been for them an expression of ego. So they projected that on another person. Well, he must be an egotist, because why else would he want to write a book, play music, give a big discourse? Probably from the wrong motivation, because that was their mind, they projected it. And so Swami ran into that, and of course he sent some of the people that did say that to him. He respected in their own way. Oh gosh, I don't want to be an egotist. What do I do? What do I do? How do I do that? So he ran into this difficulty, and he came to the solution, of course. He says, yes, I want to do this, but I'm not doing this for myself. And I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this for God. I'm doing this for my guru. And if they want to take it away, fine. There's no, because I'm here and I've been given this task to do in life, I need to do it the best way possible. And this is sometimes people have this thought, as a devotee, to do a job really well. Sometimes people think, well, I'm a devotee, I don't want to do that. I don't want to stand out, I don't want to shine. But that does not mean that we shouldn't do the absolute best for God's sake, for Guru's sake. And so he was able to release that egoic approach. And he would often, in later years, he says, people come to him, and like he said, he particularly picked on musicians at this point. He would say, musicians come to me, because Swami would tell an aspiring musician coming up, that he would, especially when they're new on the spiritual life, is to they like to create their own songs. And he would advise them not to. Say first, no, don't do that. Because especially if they had a certain attitude, and then people would come to him and say, well, I've got to create it. It's in me. I'm a musician. I just got to create. I got to be me. And Swami would say, no, if you have to be me, excuse me, if you have that impulse that you just have to do it, that's a danger sign. Do it because you want to serve God and Guru. But if God and Guru doesn't want you to do that, okay, I can do something else. But once a person has overcome that initial egoic impulse, then maybe he does have talent. And then use it to serve God. Use it to serve God. Be in tune. So in other words, what he would be saying here is get in tune first. First get in tune. And then use your creativity. Now there's in a free sense, but introspect, because this is it's subtle, and we're going to all make mistakes, so don't worry about it. But just learn from the mistakes and keep trying. Now there's a story in the Bible that the master is a wealthy man, and he has servants, and the master's going away. So in those days, of course, they would keep their wealth, in money or gold or something. And in the old days, in those days, they would have pieces of gold, and they were called talents. One piece of gold was called a talent. It was a denomination of a certain amount of money or gold. And so he had a bag of gold, 2 bags of gold, and of talents. And he gave one to one servant and says, I'm going away for a year. Take care of this. So he'll give it back when I return. And he gave a second bag to another servant. Well, the first servant, thinking, well, the master wants me to preserve his wealth here. And so he went out and he found a large rock, and he pulled the rock up and he hid the talents under a rock. And when he came back, the master came back and asked for his money back. He was very proud. He went out, dug up the rock, got the talents back, and gave it back to the master. Secondly, he went to the second servant. He says, well, where's my money? Well, the second servant, when the master left, he had taken that and he had invested it in something. And the money grew. And the interest, I suppose, on the money. So when he came back, he gave the money back to the master, and he gave him the growth, the interest as well. He gave him more. And the master was very happy with the second servant, and he was very displeased with the first servant. And from this story, there comes a saying in the English language of, don't hide your talents under a rock. Now, the word talent in modern language is no longer used for money. It's used for what? It's used for some skill or some ability that we have, but it applies, and it's transferred into the modern language. Don't hide your talents under a rock. And people sometimes think that it's virtuous to hide your talents under a rock. Keep them under there. Don't let anybody see them lest they think you're an egotist. Now, it doesn't matter what other people think. You might be better to say, don't hide your talents, because it might make me an egotist. Now, that's a little more valid. If you're subject to that temptation in some way, that's maybe that might be the thing to do, is to not allow that to go in that direction. But if you're even better, would be to use your talents in the service of the master. In this case, literally in that story, but it's in the same thing in our own modern usage. And here is, if you have a talent, and we all do, it's think of ways, it's been given to you. It's been given to you from past life, probably. You carried it over. But on the other times, maybe it has arisen in this life. It's like a little plant, perhaps, in this life, in which we cultivate that plant, and so that it flowers. But this has been given to you as something from the past. Now, it can be, we're given things from the past that cannot be to our welfare, also bad habits and so on. So we have to discriminate here. But remember what also definitions. What is discrimination? The teachers remember this. What is discrimination? It's that, you can come up with an intellectual answer, but it's those things, those actions, being able to choose those things in life that is going to take us in the direction of freedom, soul freedom. That ability to choose the right path. That's discrimination. And now we have to look. We have been given talents, all of us. Our job is to learn to discriminate which one of these talents are going to take us in the right direction. Now, any talent probably can go either way. You see, it can go plus or minus if misused. So that also is the necessity of, if we've been given some, like Swami, he obviously in the past, these talents came to him, and actually he had said, Riku had told, in one of the readings, had said he had been a singer. He'd been many things in the past, king he had been, but one of them was a singer. He had been a singer in the past, sadhu in the past also, and that he had carried that singing ability over. So he decided to use his talents for the benefit of spreading his guru's work. And so if you use your talents in the right way, they're magnetic. The things that you're good at are probably magnetic for you, and you can then use them as a stepping stone, as a tool to help you to be able to raise your energy upward and in the right direction. So Swami was careful with people. He encouraged people to use their talents, but first we have to rein them in, because we've been used to using them in the wrong way. See, sometimes sometimes he would say, no, don't do that, right? They just meditate, be a devotee. But in the long run, if a person was good at something and they had the right spirit, he would then encourage them to go that way. I know in watching people come to the Ananda work, in America at least, people would come and they would, we interview them sometimes, and we would say, what have you done in the past? What do you want to do? And I remember one fellow, he worked for an oil company, and he was an executive in an oil company, and he sold, basically a salesman. He was a salesman selling oil. And he came and he says, I never, ever want to do that again. It was terrible. I was terrible, and I was in this track of getting to be a successful salesman and competing with my fellow salesmen and all of the corporate things that go on. And he says, and I got into that, and I was in that lifestyle, and I finally realized I never want to do it again. And so he came to another, he says, I have nothing to do with that. And so, okay. So he went and he started doing I can't remember the exact jobs that he started off on, but serviceful things. And he got to be, he got calm, he started meditating. He was a fine man, very fine man. And he began slowly to make his way along the spiritual path. And then a time came where, it says, we got this little enterprise over here. And so why don't you just, and you're good at this, why don't you do that? Just sort of manage that. Okay, then he started managing that, then one thing and another thing and another thing. And finally he became the treasurer, you would say, of Ananda Sangha. The corporate entity became the treasurer, and hugely complicated things in that realm. And he was good at it. And he enjoyed it. But eventually, of course, that had its ending too. He says, okay, I've done enough of it, and then he was able to go on to other things. But he had freed himself from that, that tightness in the process. And then God put him in different situations. And he continued to do that sort of work. It was always somewhat of a serviceful thing on the side, and he had many, many things. And he had overcome that. So I've seen that a lot in people. They come, they reject, and maybe that's the right thing. But then time comes where those natural talents come out in the right way. And then if you use your talents towards something higher, then you start to be free of them, you see. Whereas if he'd have repressed those, they would have been there, and they wouldn't have been able to necessarily overcome. Now I say necessarily, because yes, it's possible they would have overcome too, but I'm saying this just because Swami tended to be the type that was an expansive in his nature, so he saw that in other people, and where appropriate, he did, but not always. There were people in the Ananda work that came up that I thought were quite brilliant, good speakers, had a lot of talents in a lot of ways, and Swami did not encourage them. I don't want to be too close to naming anybody, but there was one person in particular, very brilliant, and many years went by, and there were certain aspects he would not allow certain things of this one person. And I was wondering why, that was the case. But I don't know the reason why in that particular case, but I suspect, I could see it if I started to think about it, I could see the potential to go wrong for somebody. That probably is not going to work for that person if they took it because they were too bright, you might say, but it had to be perhaps rechanneled first, and the heart needed to be opened up first. And so you can see, we have to individually approach this. Now, I still have time. I mentioned this because this was important to Swami, but there was, because I want to cover some scholastic fundamentals before we end here, but there's one other story that, keep this in mind, is many of you, I hope, have read about the life and the saints of Ananda, a very beautiful saint, and an important saint, and somebody that's somewhat dear to our tradition, because Master, of course, writes about her in the autobiography of a yogi, and also Swami Kriyananda, when he came to India and spent his time in India, he became quite close to her, and she actually looked upon him favorably and encouraged him. Now she did, some other people she didn't encourage, but for whatever reason, she took a particular liking to Swamiji and encouraged him in his endeavors. And so Swami always felt very attracted to her as like an expression of Divine Mother to him. So if you have read her books about her, I don't think she wrote anything herself, although she did narrate something of her biography to other devotees. But she always referred to herself, she never referred to herself as I. When she said, she would not say, I went to Delhi. She'd say, this body went to Delhi. Now, I have heard people that are quite a bit less elevated than Ma refer to themselves in the third person. Oh yes, Jaya, he went to Delhi last month, and Jaya did this, or substitute for your own, or perhaps the royal we went to Delhi last, the Queen speaks like that. We went to Delhi, and it sounds very affected. It doesn't. It just because a person really hasn't transcended that sense of I-ness, but Ma had. There was that from the very first. She never saw herself as that body, as identified with that body. She'd say this body, and it was happening through her. Something, the divine play was moving through her, the divine energy, and it was moving through her. And so she just was an observer, you might say, like that saying of Master's eye, the cosmic sea, watch, the little ego floating in me. And so she watched, she was in that state, watching what was happening. And I think this is the state that we want to be. We want to, not that the ego goes away, but we're not identified with it anymore. We just watch it, because the ego is an element of individuality that was there from the very beginning. People think, well, if I'm not my ego, what will it be? I'll just dissolve. There won't be any me, and, well, there won't be any attachment, but individuality is always there from the very beginning. Master said, that sense of individuality is always there, even as a memory. And so consequently, but there's no attachment, and then the cosmic sea doesn't think that little ego in me is who I am. It just watches it. So that's how we want to be. And do you remember how there's a saying in Swami's life, He once said that I've come to the point, and I may have this slightly off, but he says, I've come to the point in my life where I see Swami Kriyananda as simply an event for which I am responsible. In other words, Swami Kriyananda was something that was happening. But it wasn't who he was. He was just watching it happen. And it's in that same tradition. And in Swami's case, he used that event to sing, to write, to lecture. He used it because that's what God had brought into this world through that body, and he used it to be able to serve his Guru, and for no other reason. And I think that's something for each of us to remember. And you're going to find a very some might find this a difficult truth, but that this body will never be happy for long. Because it cannot. This body lives in the world of happiness and pain and suffering. And this body will never be always happy. We're going to fluctuate between happiness and sadness and suffering. Now, that doesn't mean, how does that correlate with what Master said? My quest in life is to be happy. And that's true. And this is the good side of ego. Because ego has been given to us, a sense of identity has been given to us for a purpose. It's to reform it and to refine it so that we can use it as a tool to elevate ourselves and refine it. We come into this world, animals don't have much ego, if any ego at all, but on the human level, we have this ego, and as such, we suffer. And suffering and the quest for happiness, that interplay, is what drives us to ultimately refine ourselves, and we become finer and finer, and until we use that ability to make choices in life, which is what is given to us by our sense of I and discrimination that goes with it. That discrimination, we refine it, and we take it to making good choices, better choices. So we're somewhat on a low level, but then we refine, and we get to the point where we can say, yes, I can choose to be happy. I can be happy all the time. But I cannot be happy all the time. This body cannot be happy all the time. It just doesn't work that way. We have to get to the point, refining it, to the point where we say, and give it up. And then that eternal happiness of bliss can come. But as long as this body, and we think this is who we are, we're not going to ever be happy all the time. We're going to have to go through the cosmic flux of Maya, up and down, of identification. Now, I said I don't want to end this without going over some fundamentals. This is also a class, you see, and all of you know. Where is my book? There it is. All of you know your Patanjali, I hope. Or at least you know the outline of it a little bit. And you know it starts with, now we come to the study of yoga. And I'm not going to go into all of this, but explaining these. But then we come secondly to yoga's chitta, fritting the road. Yoga is the neutralization or the moderating of the waves of chitta, the likes and dislikes. And so if we think about, and this brings up the topic of, the four states, the four elements, a little Shankya philosophy here, four elements of consciousness, expressions of consciousness, and you aspiring teachers who know this, that you have mon, buddhi, ahankara, and chitta. Mon seated here, Buddhi seated here, Ahankara seated at the point medulla oblongata, and Chitta seated here in the center, you might say, of the chakras up and down. And this Chitta is mind and intellect, and then after intellect you come to the ego. And ego in and of itself is not highly binding. It is binding, yes, but not to the degree that until we enter the Chitta enters into the conversation. In other words, we have a sense of I-ness, but we can take it or leave it. You might say, if we didn't have Chitta there, it was just a fact of the matter, and it was there. But when you enter in Chitta, that likes and dislikes of the heart that work upon Chitta, this is what ends up binding us and causing us our distress. And so Patanjali elucidates this dilemma by saying in the very beginning, the second stanza, that yoga is the neutralization of these waves of Chitta. And I guess I have this, my scribe, you want to draw some nice waves on that board there. I brought that thing out. So yeah, that's good. It is a nice wave, go all the way across. Okay, there we have the waves of Chitta, likes and dislikes, that is propelling this engagement. Oh my God, oh, I'm happy, I'm sad, I like it, I don't like it, I'm suffering, I'm joyous. This back and forth. Now, yoga is learning to neutralize those, you see. And so what you have is, that's what he says in the second chapter, or the second stanza, but how many people read beyond the second stanza when they're studying Patanjali? They kind of say, oh yes, 1 and 2, and then somewhere down the way he talks about the yamas, niyamas, and that's about it. But there's more. And number 3 is very important here. Number 3 says, now, yoga is the neutralization of the waves of Chitta. Then, the sage abides tranquilly in his inner self. Okay? So when the waves are moderated, the sage and the ego, you could say, rests. Then, number 4, he says, otherwise, the vrittis cause the indwelling self to assume many outward forms. So what he's saying is, if it's not tranquil, if those aren't tranquil, the vrittis will assume many outward expressions. In other words, ego arises. And so what you have is you have these, what that implies there is that ego is not necessarily anything of itself. It doesn't have its own independent reality. It's just an illusion. It's an impression. It's something that expresses when vrittis are activated. So although when we are in that state of ego, we think it's very real. I am very real. This identity, this personality, who I am, this is something that has substance to it, but it has no substance. It's just the waves of likes and dislikes, and we then create this, you might say, phantom reality of what that really is around it. And so to get rid of the ego is not to attack the ego, you see. It's to attack, if you want to use that word, the likes and dislikes of this world, of this inner world, these vrittis. And if we learn to overcome that emotional, subjective reaction to life, and calm that, so we're even-minded. Master added something to that. We're not just even-minded, we're even-minded and cheerful in all circumstances. You find, if you're in that state of even-minded and cheerfulness, that ego action begins to go. But action doesn't stop. You use the action with your discrimination as best as you possibly can in the right way. But that attachment of I begins to be sloughed away. So this goes back to what Krishna says in the Gita. We must act. We can't avoid action. Action is, there's no such thing as non-action. We must act. But then the question is, and of course the Gita goes on about this in length, we must act in the right way. And as I think as the vendor the other night was implying, although the stanza wasn't there, to act in the right way is expressed especially in the last chapter, the 18th chapter, is to act in attunement with Krishna, in this case, with attunement with God. And then all results of that outward action, you give it to God. God takes it. It's not us. It's not binding to us. Karma, to the degree that where this body is acting, we suffer the consequences of that karma. So when we no longer identify with it, karma continues. It's not that the results of action stop, but the karma no longer accrues or attaches or sticks, you might say, to this body, or to this, maybe to the body, yes, but no longer to the indwelling spirit who is animating that body. So this is how we overcome. It's not that karma stops. It's not that action stops, reaction. That's a fact of nature. But the karma, in the sense of it being binding, that we begin to transcend. And so this is, in a sense, the ego itself has not its own, it's not a foe, or it could be a foe. It's not a friend. It could be a friend. It's really up to us, and it can be either one. So we want to go beyond it, not identify with it, and transcend it into that cosmic sea, the consciousness of being one with the cosmic sea. Just as Mom was in that state, doing what needed to be done as directed by the divine will, and doing it joyfully, cheerfully, even-mindedly. So I would like to open it up to questions. I should have answered 5 minutes ago, but in a few minutes that are left, I'd like to invite questions. Yes, Vineet.
So, when you were mentioning about acting with the human, sometimes our ego can fool us that this is divinely inspired.
Now, can the ego fool us? Of course it can. That's the problem right there. And this is why Swami always emphasized, and where we started these discussions back some month or two ago, we have to be a divine warrior willing to take up the challenge and realize that we're going to fail sometimes, or maybe more than sometimes. We're going to fail, but we have to take up the challenge. And you can't run away from the battle because you might lose. And you can almost guarantee you're going to lose to some degree, but you keep trying, and perfecting, so you're going in the right direction. And then also, this is why many times in our discourses we talk, one of the things that Swami said, absolutely, you have to be a divine. Swami said, to get there, 3 things you need, the warrior needs. You need to have the spirit of a warrior, that this path is life or death to you. You're willing to do it because it's important. Otherwise, if you don't think it's important, you'll do something else. And this is what, of course, people do. They do something else. But if it's important, you will do what's important to you. Secondly, you have to have a daily sadhana that's important to you and be willing to do. A lot of people are big talkers, but small doers. And so you've got to have that. And third, this was the interesting one I always found. He said you must be in the long run, to last on the spiritual path for a lifetime or more. You have to be self-honest. Absolutely honest with yourself. Now you can fool other people, and we do. to some degree, but you mustn't fall into the trap of fooling yourself, because then you start believing your falsehoods, and it's, unfortunately, we get into that. But that's another one. I don't want to do that. I won't do it again. So this is it. So that absolutely you're going to need a statement. Now, of course, this is why we pursue on the spiritual path. What can I do? How can I not fall into the pit? Well, this is what, like a couple of weeks ago, I was giving some suggestions about seva. A few weeks before that, she was giving things about divine love, awakening the heart, these necessities. And next week, I want to come back and add a third one to that, which is the topic of attunement and the implications of that. These are all meant to give us ways of how do we overcome this trap, or how do we overcome, it's the human condition, how do we overcome to take us to where we want to go, which is freedom. And yes, that's just the way it is. Okay, I'm going to end, unless there's one more. Yeah, okay.
I have 2 questions.
Okay, he's got 2.
The first one is the example that you gave of the musician. When master said, when the musician wanted to...
Oh, the musician, yes.
But then you just said that we need to do what we need to do.
Yep.
So how do we make it?
Well, there you go. This is, Swami mentioned that because Ananda was full of a lot of musicians. And he said, if it's a compulsion, he says, it's always good to overcome don't let it be a compulsion. But if it is there's something in there that's a talent, I'm assuming. There's something in there that's a talent, but don't let your talents become compulsive. See, who controls it? And so consequently, whenever somebody would say to Swami, I need to do this for my own whatever, he would say, be careful. Because you're not in control of it's compelling you. So you don't want to be compelled. So you want to, so sometimes it may be, now he didn't say forever and ever, he was saying, but if something is driving you rather than you using it, then you want to, you're not in control of that. And so then you cannot, if you're not in control of it, the long incarnations of habituality will tend to take us in a direction towards self-expression in an ego way. Now, I would say this though, and Swami did say this too. He says, if you're in and this is, so some people, we're self-aware enough to know our faults. We're so let's say we are self-aware enough to know that I've got these temptations, I've got these compulsions, I've got this. Now, Swami, he would give contradictory statements, but on the one hand, he'd say, just moderate that, get control of your compulsions first. But non-action, you can't just be sitting. You have to do something. So the action needs to be taken in some way. So he said, it's better to act and make mistakes than to not act at all. You see, because to act at all, you're not doing anything to address whatever the situation is. So it's better to act, but because we're at different levels. Because at least if you're acting and you're doing, you have something in motion that you can work on, and then you get it moving, and then you can direct it in a better way, rather than not acting. And so consequently, if we used a musician, he wouldn't tell the people not to do music, but he'd tell them, don't be compelled, and try to get a hold of it and direct it in a way that is serviceful, in his case, he was in an ashram setting. Use your music to express and serve beauty, serve God, serve something higher, not fall into the trap of serving your own inner sense of ego fulfillment. And now that's subtle. And I don't think anybody, until they're absolutely free, are totally free of those impulses, because it's a very fundamental fight that we're in there. And so, but nevertheless, it's directional. You have to take something, if you're very attached to, your cooking, cooking, good chef, good, Ananda's a good cook, you see. You do it to serve God, serve other people, bringing out good taste, and this is, as long as you're not, it's a free, it's a then bringing beauty into the world is for other people is a good thing. And I think you see this like really good musicians, like that flautist, Mr. Yeah, who was playing over here a couple years ago. A really good musician. Now, I don't know. I think probably a younger version of him might have been playing because, I'm good. But I suspect when a person like that gets into his older self, which he is now, there's more like he's a flow for something through him. See, when we remove ego, then the divine inspiration that is behind that music can come through the instrument cleanly and beautifully. But when the ego gets involved in there, like we were at this concert of his here a couple of years ago, and there was him playing on the flute. And do you remember, some of you remember the drummers? They were show-offs. No, they were good show-offs, and I enjoyed their drumming because it was an exhibition of talent, on the drum. So, but nevertheless, I couldn't help but smile because you could see that they were egotists. I don't know if that goes with drumming or not, but boom, 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 and then. Whereas the flute is sort of a more sattvic instrument in a way. But anyway, you can see it in his elder self. I wonder what he was like when he was a boy, But I think it's kind of like that. Is that we take the ego out of it, and then music. And I think every musician aspires to this. I hope is you become a pure channel for beauty and creativity or upliftment and inspiration. So anyway, that was. But you had two questions. This will be the last one.
The other one was when we walk away from unfavorable situations. Is that because of our ego, or
when we walk away from
unfavorable situations?
There's no right answer, yes or no, to that. You have to explore that in your motivation. And sometimes a wise general retreats if knowing that to attack is going to lead to destruction. So it's tactical, you see. You have to make a tactical choice of what's going to take you ultimately to where you want to go. But we're not always ready to take on every challenge. We're not always, and that there are times when you just have to, you start to do something, you think, I'm not ready, and you got to and you go back to build your strength up until such time that you can win, that you can succeed, and you can do. So you have to, it's your motivation. Now, if you're running away from something out of fear, that's a different thing.
But we can never win against another person, right? I meant in terms of, because we're all dealing with people around us, and then walking away from an unfavorable situation with respect to another person.
In favorable, yes. Well, when you're dealing with people, sometimes it serves your purposes to let the other person win. And even there's those situations too. Winning, and how do we define winning? Is something also to understand. It's something letting the other person get his way, even if the other person's wrong. Sometimes you have to do that because there's no better choice. And you really have to assess yourself, is this battle worth fighting for my own sake? Is this battle worth fighting for that person's sake? Is this battle worth fighting for everybody's sake? Is he really winning? And sometimes, you know, even in life, sometimes you see, hey, Dharma seems to win, and I think we see that a lot. And so what do? We want to work against it, but is it worth sacrificing myself totally to that to win a small battle when the larger battle is perhaps not won? So I guess what I'm saying is you have to see it in context of the total long-term picture, but not be motivated by fear. You see, or for the let's say fear or improper motivation is, you know, because then you step back, you're just going to have to face that again in another day because you haven't overcome that. But if you're making a choice that outwardly looks like it's a retreat or capitulation, but inwardly it's part of a longer rhythm, that because there's ups and downs, the moment needs to be sometimes sacrificed for the longer rhythm goal of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. But use common sense. You know that you have to. What did Swami always used to say? Be practical in your idealism, is how Swami would say that. So I'm going to leave it at that. And thank you all for coming today, and I'll see you next week, I hope.